the future of female sports in Idaho. We were lucky that Representative Barbara Ehardt helped us get a law passed, but now the ACLU is fighting back. We're going to tell you all about it tonight. But first, I would like to start you off with a little video. Give me a second here. We are going to roll right in with our first honorable guest here, Representative Barbara Ehardt from Idaho. She is an amazing woman with many titles, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you all. Thanks for coming, Barbara.
Beth, thank you. Thank you for your help, certainly as we tried to move this kind of legislation forward. But let me first say that video that you just showed actually is a fun and I think a phenomenal video. And you'll notice that right in the middle of it, for anyone who's watching, you'll see a segment that had taken place right here in Idaho. And that was our Big Sky Championships, in which June Eastwood, who had run the last 3 years for the University of Montana on the men's side, and had incredible times, decided to run this year as a woman and absolutely crushed our female athletes. And that also was something of which I addressed on our state floor during the bringing forward of this legislation. But let me first say, as I introduce myself, that I was born and raised here in Idaho. And I was one of those people that when I was born in the 60s and kind of grew up in the 70s, and people who are younger than me and those who are my age, like Misha, they don't understand that the opportunities for women just as a whole have not always been here. And so when I was growing up and people had asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, that was kind of a double-edged sort of answer, because my options were really limited, and it was really be a stay-at-home mom, which I absolutely would love to have done, but I didn't end up having children. And so that wasn't an option, but I really thought I could be a secretary, I could be, for whatever reason, an airplane stewardess, or I could teach school. And when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I literally would tell them that I wanted to play sports. And I was told over and over, that's not what girls do. And so I did not understand as an 8-year-old kid that in 1972, Title IX would literally change my life. And when Title IX passed, I was able to participate in junior high basketball, where people before me had not been able to do that. And of course, I was able to go on and play high school, and that led to receiving a scholarship to play at Idaho State University. And after that, I went on to have a 15-year collegiate Division I coaching career at 4 different institutions. And I have always known that those women who had gone before me had helped to pave the way and forge a path forward for people like me to be able to not just play sports in high school, but even have an opportunity to go on and to compete collegiately. And then imagine that, to have a career coaching Division I women's basketball for 15 years. And so when we talk about this legislation, when we talk about Title IX, this is personal to me. This is what changed my life. And so it was, the question is also asked, what made you decide to bring this legislation? I've been working on this legislation for over 2 years. And as I was working on it, when it first had come to my mind, it was because of watching literally what had been happening in Connecticut and following very closely how it started out as just one biological male deciding to compete on the women's side, and then there were two, and those young girls were not able to compete and to win as they should have under a fair playing field. And that's when I realized that this was, as you start looking, was happening all over the country and internationally. And that's when I decided that we needed to do something before our athletes here in Idaho were also limited and impacted by biological males deciding to compete on our side. And so when I first started working on this, no one else had anything like this. I reached out to so many groups and so many people asking for help. Even our legislative services here at Idaho State could not help me write the legislation as it needed to be written. And it wasn't until some time later that I actually had reached out back to Alliance Defending Freedom and was able to connect with one, Matt, who has been fantastic and was very helpful in helping me to get the language of this legislation to such a point that we could actually bring it forward and do something that would actually be beneficial in protecting opportunities for girls and women in sports. Beth?
Oh, there. Can we hear me now? Okay. Thank you, Barbara. You're amazing. Can't wait to speak with you in a little bit here. For now, let's go to our next speaker. I am excited to introduce Christiana Holcomb, Legal Defense for Alliance Defending Freedom. Thanks for coming, Christiana.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you,
Introduce
Beth,
yourself
so
a little bit here.
Sure. Well, my name is Christiana Holcomb, and I'm an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom, and I am not an athlete. So let me just make that really clear from the outset. Was never gifted in that way. But the women's athletics, fairness in women's sports issue really started to intrude on my notice when I started hearing reports out of the state of Connecticut that there were young female athletes who were being sidelined in their own sports. And so, we looked around, like, where are the feminist groups? Where are the civil liberties organizations that are going to really tackle this and defend these young women? And frankly, all we heard were crickets. So it's been our privilege to represent 4 incredibly brave young women in the state of Connecticut who are pushing back against a policy that basically allows biological males to just identify as female and then to compete in the girls category. And not just compete, but actually dominate. So one of these male athletes has now taken away 15 women's state championship titles that used to be held by 9 different girls a couple of years ago. One of my female athletes, Chelsea Mitchell, should have earned 4 of those state championship titles. And I mean, can you just imagine what it's like for a young female athlete to, burn the candle at both ends of the day, up early, out late, trying to train to shave just fractions of seconds off of her time. And then she shows up at the starting line and she knows that she can't win. So it's been incredibly heartbreaking to see. But I could not be more proud of these young women as they have been willing to push back and frankly, do what the adults in the room should have done a long time ago, which is to fix a discriminatory policy, which is depriving female athletes of their athletic opportunities. So it's been our privilege to file both a Title IX complaint on behalf of these young women and then followed it shortly thereafter by a federal lawsuit. So as this has been ongoing, we watched the incredible work that Representative Ehardt did in the state of Idaho. And of course, we knew exactly what the ACLU's response was going to be to the Fairness of Women's Sports Act. And so when we saw them file that federal lawsuit challenging Idaho's new law, which does a really simple thing, it just ensures that if you have a sports team that's designated for females, girls or women, that only biological girls compete on that team so that girls have those equal athletic opportunities. When we saw that lawsuit come through, we were approached by a couple of Idaho State University athletes who wanted to get involved. They wanted to make sure that the court heard their side of the story because they are the young women that this law was designed and intended to protect. So I have the privilege of representing Madison Kenyon and Mary Kate Marshall, who are two Idaho State University athletes that compete both in cross country and track and field. They both have personally lost to a male athlete. They've competed against June Eastwood and lost to that biological male. And frankly, they had the extremely heart-rending situation of watching one of their own teammates be pushed off of the podium by June Eastwood at the Big Sky Championship Conference, which was part of the video footage that Beth played earlier. So obviously still very early in the litigation process in that case, but I'll close by saying I am very optimistic about the future of women's sports. It looks really, it looks dire and it looks difficult and challenging right now because there are, not just in Connecticut and Idaho, but there are states across the country that have these discriminatory policies against young women. But I want you to know the vast majority of the American public is with us on this issue. I've seen recent polling from both July and August of this year that says upwards of 75 to 80% of Americans agree it is not fair to allow males to compete in and dominate girls' sports. And then we've seen just incredible support from the United States Department of Justice, who has filed supporting briefs both in Connecticut and in Idaho, and then two, from the United States Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. The entity charged with enforcing the purpose and promise of Title IX has come out and clearly stated it is a violation of federal law to allow these males to dominate women's sports. So I am encouraged, not just by these things, but again, Beth, your advocacy and all you're doing to really galvanize women around this issue.
Well, thank you, Christiana. Courage calls to courage. And I think a lot of us feel like we wouldn't be here without each other. And I wouldn't be more proud to stand beside anyone else in this battle. Thank you so much for the work you do. I look forward to chatting with you and Barbara in a little bit here. But first, we have the amazing opportunity to listen to some testimony that was provided by champion powerlifters, one of whom drove many, many hours just to testify that day. First, I'm going to introduce you to Misha Fayant, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her athletic accolades. And Misha.
Hi. So yeah, I was a multi-time world powerlifting champion, 2 times as a 3-lift champion, and 2 times as bench press as a master's lifter. So I'm just going to read off the testimony that I gave at our House hearing here in Idaho, and hopefully that fills in some of the gaps for everyone. Hello, my name is Misha Fayant. I'm a mother, grandmother, entrepreneur, speaker, coach, author, and 4 times Masters World Powerlifting Champion, and I've been a lifelong Democrat. I've been involved in girls and women's sports since grade school. I competed in basketball, soccer, volleyball, track and field, and powerlifting, and I coached youth basketball and volleyball. I was also the USA Powerlifting State Chair for 3.5 years, and during that time I grew the number of women competing from under 20% of lifters to just under 50%. But most importantly, these experiences have given me the opportunity to see firsthand how sport can change a female's life. It instills perseverance, pride, and a belief in self, and can help move a girl from victimhood to a feeling of accomplishment. And I would argue that sport can be life-saving, giving girls hope and strength to overcome depression and oppression and find their own power in life. I am an abuse survivor, and I grew up knowing what it felt like to be overlooked due to the males around me, of having to fight for opportunity and rights, to stand against ridicule for even wanting to compete. I understand the mindset shift that happens as a woman takes on competing and feels the accomplishment of setting records, breaking barriers, and becoming stronger, not just physically, but mentally. I went from depressed, despondent, and all but giving up on life to finding passion, purpose, and self-worth that would propel me to work with and stand for women who have had similar experiences. Had I not had the hope of becoming a world champion, because I knew I would be competing against males, I'm not sure I would have had the drive to compete, a drive that changed my life. The medical director of USA Powerlifting, Dr. Chris Hunt, has put out compelling information showing that even with hormone therapy, a male body will only lose an average of 10% of its advantage over a body-born female. So I took a look at the males who are the same age, weight, and accomplishment range as me, and the numbers lifted by these men were 40 to 60% higher than my own numbers as world champion. Take 10% off and they would still be 30 to 50% over. And just as reference, I did look up my own numbers as opposed to a man who is the same age, weight, and class as me, and his squat was around 800 and mine was just under 400. So you take 10% away from his number, he would still have lifted 720 pounds, where I was only capable of lifting about 400. It still is a huge advantage for them. So the scientific differences that are born within males do not go away completely, especially past puberty and even with hormone treatments. I would urge that girls, knowing that they're competing against male bodies who are innately superior to their own in sport, would feel oppressed from the beginning, and many may not even choose to participate in competitive sport, something that has the possibility of changing their lives for the positive. This is more than male bodies winning in female sports. It's about the continued oppression of females and the trampling of our rights. I urge you to understand the wide sweeping damages that can be imposed by dismissing the rights of girls to accommodate the identity of males. Title IX is based on sex, not gender, on science, not identity. I urge you to think about our girls, their rights, their hopes, their futures, and why we have sex-segregated sports in the first place.
Oh, Misha, that was incredible. What a powerful testimony, and what a strong woman you are.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. And if anybody has questions for Misha or Barb or Christiana or Robin, please remember there's that little Q&A tab, and we'll keep updated on there. We've got a few questions coming in. We're going to hear testimony from one more person, another champion powerlifter, Robin Ray, and I want her to tell you her story of how she testified and then share her testimony. Robin, you ready?
I think I'm there.
All right. Hello.
Okay, can you see me, hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so my name is Robin Ray. I am the current IPF, International Powerlifting Federation, world champion for the women's masters 125-pound weight class. And my testimony, I'm the one that drove about 9 hours from North Idaho to South Idaho to give my testimony at the committee hearing. And my daughter also drove down with me. So it wasn't just me, but it was also my young daughter who recently graduated from high school. So it was really good to have her there with me as well, because as my colleagues have said, this is not about us. This is about our future generations. So I'll just kind of summarize what my testimony was. I'll just read a few blurbs of it because my testimony was fairly long. But my testimony, I grew up a poor child until I was 12 years old, and I grew up with an older brother. So I grew up having to participate with the boys, play with the boys, box with the boys, race BMX bikes with the boys. And all of this was during the summer after school because I was not allowed to participate on the boys' teams. So that was one of the things that I grew up, being accustomed to. I was never one to back down. As a girl, I had my brother there to support me and cheer me on and push me. So I always had the strength that I needed as a female competitor athlete to be able to go with that. So fast forward 30 years from my childhood, and I am a world champion powerlifter. For the International Powerlifting Federation. This federation is a 100% drug tested federation. So you cannot be on any type of hormone therapy to be able to participate in that federation. So if you want to participate in that federation, you cannot be on testosterone, you cannot be on any kind of what could be is used as a steroid masking agent, which is one of the drugs that trans people use to suppress their testosterone. So it's not just about suppressing your testosterone, but it's also about, you know, the inherent advantages that these male-bodied athletes retain even after hormone transition. So I took my world's experience and compared it to my male counterpart at that same event, same year, 2019, International Powerlifting Federation World Championships in Helsingborg, Sweden. And if you take the 10% performance reduction that a male would take by reducing his testosterone, a woman will gain an average of 10% if she takes performance enhancing drugs. That still left a 20 to 40% advantage that my male counterpart would have still retained over me if he, you know, in the event of that. So taking that into consideration, if he were to decrease his performance by 10%, I increased mine by 10%, he still would have outlifted me by 153 pounds between 3 lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift. That is a massive gap in performance between a man and a woman. So I just want to say that I thank Barbara Ehardt and I thank the state of Idaho for stepping up and standing up for the girls and women in sports, because without us, our girls are not going to be able to participate in the event if we keep going down the road that we're going. So, you know, it's about protecting what has been granted to the women and girls of the future, not just us. So I want to thank Beth and Save Women's Sports for inviting me on to this. And thank you for stepping up and letting me be part of it.
Robin, thank you. It's so encouraging to see how many women are speaking up. It just takes one or two, and people like you, Robin, are going to change the world. Thank you.
We're trying to. Thanks for taking the charge.
Yeah, I'm never been so happy to do something in my life. I feel so driven to help females because, as you said, it's not necessarily about us right now. It's about our future generations of females. It's about our daughters and their daughters, and we want them to have female sports that are fair.
Yes.
All right, we are going to go to a little Q&A chat here now with Christiana and Barbara. We've got some questions coming in already. Barbara, there she is. All right. Ladies, their first question here is for Barbara. Kesha in Georgia wants to know, why does this seem to be such a partisan issue? And why don't fellow female athletes understand the full ramifications of this?
You know what, Beth? Actually, that is a very good question, and I don't say that lightly. Let me just share this. When I first brought this legislation forward and was just talking more about the actual issue, I did go to some of my Democrat colleagues. We have one of my Democrat colleagues actually is a Paralympic athlete and had done very well, had had an accident and had participated with Paralympics. And so she, when I had first brought this forward, was actually very receptive and I would say interested. I was actually asking her to co-sponsor it. As I was speaking with her, another one of my colleagues just on the other side had overheard this, and she's older than I am, and she had come around the corner to talk about all of the roadblocks that she had encountered when she also had wanted to play sports 10 years earlier than, say, me, when this Title IX had first started to come out. So as had been pointed out by Christiana, we have to understand that this very issue when polled and asked about throughout the United States. This is an issue on which both sides of the aisle absolutely agree. When you strictly talk about it as far as girls and women and your daughters and granddaughters and opportunities. But unfortunately, as soon as I brought it as legislation, it became polarized. And I believe one of the reasons it becomes polarized is specifically, I lay it at the feet of the ACLU, because the ACLU has decided that women and girls are no longer important like women and girls used to be important to them. They used to stand up and fight for us. And along those same lines, you know, it's important to note that during the 15 years that I coached Division I women's basketball, we were sponsored by all 4 institutions where I coached. We were sponsored by Nike. And I think it's important to say that Nike also used to be supportive of girls and women in sports, very supportive. As a matter of fact, Nike in 1995 put out a groundbreaking, it was considered a groundbreaking commercial. And one of the things it was about, and you can Google it later, if you let me play sports. And let me just tell you, because I used it, I quoted that on the floor the first time when I had brought this legislation this past session. And one of the things is I said that Nike said when they brought it out, they said, if you let me play sports, now tell me if these things aren't indicative to female, biological female girls. If you let me play sports, I will like myself more. I will have more self-confidence if you let me play sports. I will be 60% less likely to get breast cancer. That is 100% a biological female issue that we face. I will suffer less depression if you let me play sports. I will be more likely to leave a man who beats me if you let me play sports, and I will be less likely to get pregnant before I want to. These were all issues that Nike themselves, through research, had put on the board in a commercial, and there was true then and it's true today. These opportunities to play provide young girls and women with much more than just the opportunity. Although the opportunity to continue to compete and go and receive scholarships is huge, but the opportunity to grow, to have those things that will set us on a positive career path in the future. That's what sports does to us. And without taking too much time, let me also just say this, because some then argue, well, that's the same thing that would happen with a biological male who just wants to do and participate the same way. And my answer to that is quite simple. No one is keeping them from receiving those same opportunities. They absolutely are allowed to still compete. They just have to compete on their biological male side. Let me tell you what's not fair. If they're allowed to compete either on the male side or the female side, now they have 2 opportunities to compete, and we have 1 or none. And it is important to make sure that we make these points incredibly clear. They literally are taking away our opportunities.
Beth, do you mind if I address that question as well?
Go at it.
Okay, so just briefly, I see really 2 reasons why female athletes are not standing up in greater numbers. Number 1, from the young women in high school and college that I speak to across the country, they feel very alone. So they're scared. They're scared of the backlash that they're going to get on social media. They're afraid of losing their scholarships. They're afraid of retaliation from coaches and from universities. So, you know, first and foremost, the young women I speak to are with us, but they just feel very alone and they are afraid to say anything. But number 2, doxing is very real. So as your watchers may be familiar with, the ACLU threatened to ask let me back up. The ACLU demanded that the NCAA boycott the state of Idaho over its new law. And in response, Beth and her incredible organization headed up a letter from over 300 female athletes across the country asking the NCAA not to boycott Idaho, but instead to protect women and girls. Well, what happened just a few 3 to 4 short days after the letter was released, without releasing the names of those female athletes to protect their identity, unless they chose to release their names, Outsports, a radical very radical organization decided to release the names and the states and all this private information about the women who signed on to the letter. So doxing is a real thing. Retaliation, particularly on social media, is a real thing. And I think, frankly, one of the best antidotes to that is to stand up in such great numbers that they can't dox us all.
That's great. It is everyone's time to speak up. If there ever was one, now is the time. We do need to stand together in numbers. I have another question here for Christiana. What does it mean to enjoin the law in Idaho, and what happens next?
Sure. Well, when the ACLU filed a federal lawsuit against the Fairness in Women's Sports Act, they asked the court to enjoin the law. That means to put a pause on it, to make it ineffective while the lawsuit moves forward and the judge evaluates whether or not it's constitutional and consistent with federal law. Well, unfortunately, over the summer, the federal judge did decide to put the law on hold. And what that means, unfortunately, is that young women in the state of Idaho are at risk of being forced to compete against male athletes while the lawsuit moves forward. Well, that was not acceptable to Madison and Mary Kate, ADF's clients in Idaho. And so we actually just last week filed a notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. We think it's extremely important that the law be in effect to protect young women like my clients, Maddie and Mary Kate. And two, we also think the law is absolutely constitutional and consistent with federal law.
And Beth, may I also add that just as ADF filed that appeal, so did the state of Idaho.
Thank you, ladies. Let's see. Barbara, we often see this devastation in track, but you're a basketball coach. How does this affect team sports like basketball?
You know, I appreciate that too, because so often people become very very narrowly focused on what it means with team sports. You can see the devastating effects from track, but some people literally believe, well, it's just one biological male on the team. How can that hurt? And yet we have to understand, first and foremost, they literally did then take the spot of a female in order to make that team. And so somebody was displaced. And so some people say, well, you know, you take a high school team and that's not such a big deal because they probably wouldn't have made the team next year. I mean, people are literally reasoning these things out. Though I disagree with that, that's not a reason not to keep someone. Let's play this out. When you allow a biological male to participate, say, on a team, now you have to understand that the entire dynamics of that team just changed. So where you might have had one of, or would have had one of the females who would have been, say, the all-star, the leading scorer, the leading rebounder, someone who stood out, they now have become subservient to this male athlete who will now begin to dominate in that position. And everyone takes another step back. Just as what happens in track on the podium, everyone steps down and loses a spot, but it goes even beyond that. So it's not just that team on which they are playing that is affected. You have to also understand that every single opponent now whom you play will also be impacted by having that biological male on the team. So where a team might have had a different strategy and have used their athletes in a different way, they now have to change everything in order to try to guard this male and play against them. And now you can also see outcomes now change because of having this one biological male on the team. And let me just also say this. In my 15 years coaching collegiate basketball, one of the things that is a truism for all teams, not just where we were, but you look at all collegiate women's teams, and one of the things that we do is we get a squad of guys that stay with us generally throughout the year that are just students at the school that then sign up and basically participate as a squad practice player for that team. And these are not the guys who got cut trying out for the men's team. Oftentimes the people who worked with us to create a practice squad didn't even play high school basketball. They literally were just playing intramural basketball and they wanted to help. They were friends with some of our gals on the team. So we would have these practice squad of guys and they were fantastic. They would absolutely push our starting lineup. They certainly run the other team's play, but I was constantly asking them to hold back. You can't block all their shots. You can't, do this, or that. You can't be so physical, because they literally were making it so that we could not practice, and we had to ask those biological men to hold back, because our women, even Division I women's athletes, could not compete against them. Even these athletes who weren't college athletes, they were just male players. It matters.
Christiana, did you have anything to add to that?
You know, the only other thing that came to mind is I'm aware of reports of biological males competing in a number of different team sports, including soccer and volleyball. And so we're already hearing some reports of increased physical injury to young women who are being forced to compete against a physiologically superior male. So I do think there is a significant increase in risk to young women who are being forced to compete against that male athlete. And, you know, that just compounds the egregious error, as Representative Ehardt mentioned earlier, of a young woman being displaced from that team entirely.
Great. We have a question for Robin. Robin, are you still with us? Kesha would like to know if there has been any talks of protesting or boycotting the events in USA Powerlifting.
Okay.
Can you field that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're
Hi,
on.
Ken. Thanks for the question. I have not personally heard of any of USAPL, which is United States of America Powerlifting. That is the national federation for the International Powerlifting Federation, the 100% drug tested federation. I have not heard of any boycotts in the state of Idaho. I do know that the Washington meet director has canceled all meets for 2020 in the state of Washington due to COVID.
All right. Christiana, I have one back to you here. Why isn't it just a simple legal question of, gotta find it here, sorry. Why isn't it a simple legal question to ask the court, why was sports sex separated in the first place?
Well, I think it is a simple legal question, but it is being made very complex. No, I mean, I completely agree, right? So Title IX was passed nearly 50 years ago because of the physiological differences between the sexes. You know, in track and field, which is what I'm most familiar with due to the cases I'm involved with, there's a 10 to 20% performance advantage that male athletes have over female athletes. That continues to increase dramatically with other sports, all the way up to powerlifting, where you might see a 30 to 40%, disparity between male and female athletes that are comparably fit, comparably trained, and comparably gifted. So the only non-discriminatory reason for Title IX is the physical differences between the sexes. It was designed to ensure that young female athletes like Madison and Mary Kate, like Chelsea and Selena and Alana in Connecticut, have equal athletic opportunities with biological males. I do not think this is a complex legal question. It really has nothing to do with a person's lifestyle or their individual choices of how they like to present themselves in other areas of life, but biology is what matters in sports, not a person's identity. And so again, that's what gives me hope that ultimately we will be able to rectify the situation. We will be able to ensure that future generations of young female athletes can step up to the starting line, knowing that their races are fair, that their wins and their losses are fairly gained. Alana, it's heartbreaking. One of my clients, Alana Smith, will comment to me. She's like, I just feel like I'm competing for second place. I know that the race is lost before I've even started. And no young woman should have to face that in a sport that she loves. So long answer to say, yes, I do think it ought to be a simple legal question.
Yeah, and you're right. It shouldn't be up to these young girls, but man, are they brave and courageous, and we need to show them support and stand beside them and encourage more girls to speak up. I'm getting calls weekly of moms that are afraid. They don't want their girl competing with boys and they don't know what to do. And so we can point them to our website where we have a nice spot. You can file your own Title IX complaint. It's very easy to do online. And we encourage anyone who's experiencing any of these issues to go ahead and do that. You aren't the only one. We have several, Hawaii, we're looking at California now too. Christiana, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights has been very clear within the last several months that it is a violation of Title IX for these policies to allow male athletes to simply ID their way into women's sports. So yes, but I would encourage parents and coaches and frankly, anyone who's concerned about these issues. You have the most power at the local level. So I encourage you to be involved in your state athletic associations, make your voice heard. I think a lot of times these policies are passed simply by default because we fail to show up. You know, we're just not involved. And they get pushed through really without the input of the vast majority of the individuals affected by them. So yes, I strongly encourage you to get out there, start advocating, make your voice heard. Like I said, I do think the vast majority of the American public is with us on this issue, and I do think it is winnable, but we have to act.
We're going to have to stand together to save women's sports. Barbara, did you have anything to add?
I did, if I could. Christiana had touched upon something too, when it comes to what's happened locally, when it comes to what's happened in our state, such as Idaho High School Activities Association. In 2012, Idaho High School Activities Association basically had pushed upon it. You know, well, let me back up. Right now, one of the things that we constantly heard during testimony during the bringing forward of House Bill 500, Fairness in Women's Sports Act, was that why don't we just leave well enough alone? There was nothing wrong with the basically laws as they already were, and by the laws we're essentially talking about the Idaho High School Activities Association's governing body. And yet if we're going to say that, then you know what my response was? It was, well, then why didn't we leave things well enough alone in 2012 when the LGBT groups had come in to basically change the law on behalf of transgender athletes when nothing had been happening. So it's one of those things that this has happened in all states. No one knew about it. No one knew this was happening in 2012, and no one at that point could look forward and see what would be happening today. It wasn't understood. And so all these things have been happening quietly without our knowledge. And now, as we have come to find out, we are forced to deal with this. And I also want to say, since we're right here, if you don't mind, that it's very interesting to watch the other side take the conversation and take the language and really twist it to a point where it's not even actually dealing with that which we're facing. For example, right now they keep trying to confuse what's happening by saying, the puberty blocking, and if you do this and it's not going to be a problem, yada, yada, yada. To date, both nationally and internationally, when we hear about and look at what's happening with biological male athletes participating on our side, they all started on the men's side first. There is no question about who they were, whether or not, as someone alluded to the bill, are they female and how we find that out? There's no question. They were all biological male athletes who had even some success on the men's side, but decided to come to the women's side. And I think a great example of that is June Eastwood, who was at the University of Montana and then decided to run on the female side and absolutely, again, devastated female athletes, including at Idaho State. And as I said on the floor, Idaho's bill, because there is question about, the intercommerce and how that would affect Idaho's bill, was for Idaho's athletes, both at the K through 12 level and at higher education, which purports to say that if somebody from the University of Montana decided to come and compete, as what happened from the University of Montana, and come to Idaho and compete at Idaho State and compete in our Big Sky Championships, they would be allowed to. Our law does not affect the University of Montana, nor any other state. But what our law does is our law says that in Idaho, our athletes and our scholarships and our opportunities to compete will be reserved for our girls and women so that they will be able to experience the same thing that our male counterparts are experiencing. And we hope as I think Christiana, and as we know, we hope and expect that other states will follow in the same vein and do the same thing for their biological girls and women. And it will be this example and what Idaho has done in leading out that will be inspiring to other states. And I do expect that other states will pass this kind of law and this kind of legislation.
That's leading into my next question, Barbara. Thank you. I want to ask Christiana if she thinks, well, first, what's the time frame from the Ninth Circuit? And second, if you think that more states are going to introduce Save Women's Sports Acts.
Time frame from the Ninth Circuit. Well, let's just say circuit courts of appeal are not known for being fast. So we could be looking at a time frame of anywhere from 18 to 24 months. We'd love to see that moved up a little bit more quickly, but we'll see. Do I think other states will introduce Save Women's Sports bills or Fairness of Women's Sports Acts? Based on what I saw last legislative cycle, I do think yes. So I think I counted upwards of 20 states across the country last year that introduced some form of a Save Women's Sports bill, which I think is so exciting that lawmakers, regardless of the state that they're in or whatnot, they're moving forward, trying to affirmatively and proactively protect female athletes in their state. I think that's a fantastic sign. And based on that, I do think that you'll see a number of states also introduce bills this upcoming legislative cycle. But I will say they're looking at Idaho as well. And so, which is part of the reason why we hope to win this one as quickly as possible and make it very clear in federal and constitutional law that it is consistent with Title IX, it is consistent with the Equal Protection Clause to protect women's sports for female athletes.
That's awesome. What would you say to states who say, well, we don't have any female athletes competing, this isn't an issue?
Well, I would say you don't know that, and you don't know that just yet. I go back to what Representative Ehardt said a moment ago. In the state of Connecticut, these two male athletes competed on the boys team and were frankly mediocre. They were mid-level male athletes on those teams. One of them, 2 weeks after competing on the boys team, turned around and began competing and dominating, crushing the female competition. So that happened in a matter of a couple of weeks. High school is such a short amount of time. These track seasons are incredibly short, and I'm sure other sports have short seasons as well. You don't have a vast amount of time to remedy this after it becomes an issue. Two of my young women, my female athletes, Selena and Chelsea, have graduated. They're no longer in high school. Their entire high school career, for Chelsea at least, was on an unlevel playing field. And that breaks my heart. That's something she's going to carry with her for the rest of her life. So I would say this is something that needs to be proactively addressed, because that those athletic associations have proactively changed their policies to allow males to just ID their way into female sports.
Yep.
Barbara, at what level do you see evidence of this performance gap? Have you seen the differences of boys and girls and the effects of puberty? If so, how young does this start?
Well, obviously, I had already addressed that we absolutely see it as they're older. But some would say that it doesn't matter until they go through puberty, and that is 100% false. Dr. Emma Hilton is somebody with whom I've been able to speak often, and she does so much research. She's out of the UK, and she has said that it begins to manifest itself as early as, just a couple years into life, and I can absolutely attest to that. You see, one of the things now that I do is I run sport leagues, basketball leagues, and I do it specifically focusing on the younger kids. And so I've got, basketball leagues for kindergarten kids, and they're every now and then they'll put in an all-girls team against these kindergarten boys, and other teams have little girls on them. And I'll tell you what, there's absolutely zero comparison. You put that poor little all-girls team out there, and they are absolutely dominated by these little boys who are just so much more aggressive and will just take the ball from the little girls. And these aren't even necessarily little boys are going to be athletes when they get older, but just when it comes in the arena of sport and just the normal biological differences between boys and girls, men and women, you know, this manifests itself as early as 2, 3, 4 years old. There is a difference between our sexes, and it's okay to acknowledge it, to embrace it, and to have separated categories based on sex. That's what Title IX was all about, and that's why I was able to participate in sports myself.
Awesome. Christiana, I have a quick question from Hillary. She says that a search on Google says that a federal judge had banned the Idaho law on August 18th. Can you explain what really happened?
What really happened is he just put it on pause. So it's not a ban on the law. It kind of goes back to the injunction that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Just means the judge has suspended the law. It is not in effect while the lawsuit moves forward. But as I said, we have appealed that decision because we think it was incorrect. And we're asking the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to reverse that decision.
Great, great. I'm not sure who could do this one, but we have a representative from South Dakota, Fred Joich, with us tonight. Thanks for coming, Fred. And he wants to know if Biden wins, the DOE changes, if this occurs, how does that impact the lawsuit?
Christiana will be best suited to address that, but maybe
The toughie, sorry, Christiana.
Let me start by saying this though. We certainly can speculate, and I would prefer not to, me personally, think that way, but my thought is also this: regardless, up until this point, up until what happened with Connecticut and certainly with Idaho, the conversation, if any, had been dominated and one-sided, leaning towards the fact that everybody should just allow people to identify and be what they want in the arena of sport. And we have come to find out that it doesn't work. And so that conversation, no matter what happens, in my opinion, absolutely is changing. And these are the kind of things that is helping to bring light to what actually is happening, and that in the arena of sports, sex matters. And I believe that that will continue to go forward. Now, Christiana can finish answering that.
Thanks so much for that. So I'm not going to weigh in on political prognostication, but what I will say is that this ought to be an absolutely bipartisan issue. And it increasingly is a bipartisan issue. And I think with more education, with more female voices speaking out, and frankly demanding that the purpose and promise of Title IX be delivered to them, I think it increasingly will be a bipartisan issue. I cannot tell you how encouraged I have been to link arms with radical feminists on this issue, and with conservative Christian women. So this is something, the unfairness of allowing a physiologically superior male to dominate women's sports when that is the entire purpose of having women's sports as a separate category, is to protect those opportunities for them. I'm just encouraged, and I really do think that increasingly this should be something that the left and the right can coalesce around.
Hey, and Beth, just a shout out to Representative Deutsch there in South Dakota, because I know that they're looking to do the same thing as Idaho, and been able to have some fantastic conversations with them, and look forward to continuing to do the same thing.
Yeah, we look forward to helping possibly provide some testimony for that bill. I know that close to home here, where a lot of states are working on it, and I'm excited to be a part of it. You know, I am just a small town housewife. I grew up in a town of 200 people. I really didn't think that a path of activism was for me, but here I am on this journey, and I just can't tell you guys how incredible it is to have started a website, and now we have bills named Save Women's Sports getting introduced. I am like the American dream. If you can dream it, you can do it. And I just want all the other women out there to know that your voice matters. Even if it quakes when you speak, it will move mountains. And it's going to take a grassroots effort of us all to speak up. Talking to our friends, our neighbors, our coaches, the administration, this conversation needs to happen. And as we have all seen, we're not even invited to the table on this discussion most of the time. We need to start the discussion, and I'm so grateful for all of you here today. All right, next one here. Christiana, where do things stand in the Connecticut Title IX complaint, and how is that relating to Idaho?
Sure. So back in June of 2019, we filed a Title IX complaint with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, bringing to their attention the injustices and the discrimination that we saw against women in the state of Connecticut. And I'm delighted to say that in May, and then again reissued later in the summer, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights made really clear that the Connecticut Athletic Association and the school districts that are involved in facilitating this discrimination against young women are in violation of Title IX. And they issued a really strong letter of findings and a strong letter of impending enforcement. So we are waiting on them to kind of take the next step, which could be actually requiring some action on behalf of the Connecticut Athletic Association and the school districts, and really making them feel the weight of the impact of their actions and how they have harmed female athletes across the state. So we're really encouraged. I can't tell you how excited my female athletes were when we received the letter and we shared the news with them. And Selena and Alana were saying things like, I feel like this has been worth it. You know, I feel like my voice is being heard and heard at the highest levels. And so they're so encouraged. So how does that relate to the state of Idaho? Well, obviously an administrative track and litigation are two separate things. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on how the one could impact the other, but I will say it definitely matters. You know, the Department of Education is the entity in the federal government charged with enforcing Title IX. And so federal judges should be paying attention to how they interpret Title IX and what they say about this, you know, new problem that we're seeing across the country of males and women's sports. So again, I'm encouraged, I'm optimistic, but this is not the time to, you know, take your foot off the gas pedal. We have a lot of work yet to do.
Another question that we have coming in is how can we help people to see and what this real issue is? I think a lot of our issue is education. A lot of people don't realize that the threat and the ramifications of allowing males to compete in female sports, and they're asking, what can we do to help speak up? So let's talk to an average person here. Robin, what have you been doing to help encourage people to speak up?
Oh. Hey, thanks. So I read an article, I want to say about a week and a half ago, on Concerned Women of America. That group had posted something in regards to their conversations with the Department of Education at the federal level, and they shared publicly the letter that the Department of Education sent to them. So what I've been doing, I printed out, and I'm not just printing out, but I'm faxing, I'm emailing a copy of that letter to local school boards and superintendents and athletic directors. And I actually had one athletic director reach out to me. He said, thank you for sending this to me, but why are you sending this to me? And I couldn't help but chuckle, but I was like, well, I'm sending it to you because this is an issue that is happening. And I felt this was something that you could use in the future should you have an issue arise locally, that you have this piece of document from the federal Department of Education to support you in putting together a plan for the local school district. So I'm just sharing a copy of that letter with everywhere that I can, schools, school boards, you know, everywhere. I actually ran into a teacher, a high school teacher who teaches sociology in a city not too far away from where I live, and we were talking about the issue, and he's like, send me a copy of that letter. He's like, that'll be a great teaching piece. So it's not only just the athletic piece of it, but it's also the sociology piece, because he's using that to teach his sociology class what's going on and how the sexes differ. So I think it's a great piece that was provided to them that we can share.
That's awesome, Robin. And we'll make sure to copy and paste that onto our Title IX page so that people can reach out. And if they want to contact the NCAA, we have a spot, savewomensports.com/2-NCAA. And there you can contact the NCAA and let them know that they don't need to boycott Idaho. They need to protect women. We're getting close to the end. I'd like to squeeze in more questions, but I think we're down to our last couple. But I have a really good one here from Catherine Acosta. She says, would the passage of the Equality Act negate Title IX?
In essence,
You
yes.
want to start?
I mean, in essence, yes. I mean, it is probably the single greatest threat to Title IX that I see on the books right now, at least the last draft of the legislation that I saw. The Equality Act as drafted would essentially be a super statute. And so it would enshrine gender identity as a protected class across federal law, including Title IX. And if suddenly gender identity becomes what's protected instead of biological sex, well, there's nothing that would thereafter stop a biological male. And in fact, you'd be legally obligated to allow him on the basis of his identity to come in and to dominate women's sports. And so I think you're facing a future where we would be looking at having men's sports and essentially co-ed sports. You would no longer have women's sports.
Exactly.
And if that be the case, because that's literally the crux of this, and I think that was your point in Save Women's Sports. That certainly was my point. Even in coaching some 7-8 years ago, I could see where this was going. And if that happens, I actually would disagree with Christiana in so much that unless that we would have in having co-ed sports, I believe what we would have would be just male sports, because to have co-ed sports, you would have to be able as a school to sponsor, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 teams in order to get far enough down the line where females could actually still compete with their counterparts. And so I do not believe we would have sports for females at all, to be honest.
That was amazing.
I think she's exactly right. Let's keep in mind in Connecticut, 2 male athletes wiped out 15 women's state championship titles. It only takes 3 male bodies to eliminate women from the podium altogether, 6 male bodies to eliminate women from the track altogether. So so I hear a lot of people say and push back in the media on me and say, it's not that big of an issue. There's not that many of them out there. Like, what's your problem? Well, no, it only takes a couple of them to completely change the entire dynamic of women's sports such that women are eliminated.
And just one thing that I've said, and it certainly isn't addressed very often, but think on this. This is something I probably said 10 years ago, that when you look at the costs of a college education, not that many people are able to receive a scholarship on either side. But if we open up the women's side to male athletes, and it was still available before they eliminated women's sports, why wouldn't a male who was unable to go on and receive a scholarship on the men's side, why not identify as a female just to get school paid for? I mean, we're talking about things that really only involve identifying only. See, let me just say this before we finish up. We have to understand where we've been and where we were, that when this whole identification had begun, we were talking about people having complete surgeries. And then, that wasn't enough, so we'll have hormone usage. But we are literally to the point, not that I believe any of that really matters, but we are literally to the point where all you have to do is, or what's being pushed in for what is being advocated, is to identify only. So why wouldn't someone identify as a female in order to get school paid for? We have to think about what's coming, not just what the other side is telling us it is.
That's a great closing statement. But I would like to know if anyone else has anything to finish off here before we sign out.
Beth, thank you for doing this. It has been a pleasure to be able to work with Save Women's Sports. It's been a pleasure to work with Robin and Misha, and it absolutely has been a pleasure to work with Christiana and the other people at Alliance Defending Freedom, with whom I've been able to work with, and the other groups, as Christiana had mentioned, some of the, such as Wolf and some of the others that have been fantastic. It has been a coalition. It has been encouraging. So for everyone who's listening, this actually has been an encouraging process, despite all of what you may have heard from the other side, and some of the stuff that seems to be a constant attack. we're making progress. And I appreciate this opportunity, Beth, to be on here and share this stage with these fantastic people and you.
I'm honored.
Yes, Beth, thank you so much for all of the work that you do. As I said before, I do think this is a winnable issue. And I just encourage everyone who's on the webinar, there are so many different ways that you can get involved. You can get involved and make your voice heard by writing op-eds, letters to your editors, by sharing Beth's content on social media. She has a lot of fantastic content out there. Share the stories of young female athletes who are being displaced. Sign on to the letters. There's a letter to the NCAA out there. You can contact the NCAA. They are reviewing their transgender athletics policy right now. They need to hear input from actual female athletes. So there's so many ways that you can get involved. I just encourage you to keep pressing in. This is something that isn't going away anytime soon, but I do think it's winnable.
Awesome. I cannot thank you ladies enough for joining me tonight. I've never been so proud to be a woman. I love it. And I want to thank our attendees. They have been amazing in the chat. Someone even just pointed out that they looked up the physical standards for the presidential fitness test. The differences start at age 6. So look, everyone's known this the whole time. Oh man, but we still have to speak up. We still have to, like Christiana said, sign letters, write op-eds, do whatever you can do, but you can get everything you need at SaveWomenSports.com. We're here to help you. Send me an email, info@SaveWomenSports. I hope you all will join us next week. We have an amazing opportunity to listen to 2 former Olympians discuss what's happening in the Olympics, and it's going to be a great time. I look forward to seeing you, and thank you again, everyone. Together, we are going to save women's sports. Bye.
Thank you.